Now, tonight on our front, we're barely 24 hours to that crunch meeting of the dons in labor. There appears to be fire on the mountain as the workers' front looks broken with reports. The civil and local government staff union, CLOSAC, is breaking ranks with others over the opposition to the inclusion of pension funds in the new domestic debt restructuring program. This is not the only contention on that front, as pension fund managers are themselves operating on a different wavelength when it comes to the actual position of labor. Tonight, we'll clarify that particular matter, plus break down the entire new offer to give you a better appreciation and understanding of this new deal. Joining us to do this conversation is the former Finance Minister, Sek Tepe, and an assistant professor of accounting and financial management at the UK-based University of Sheffield, Dr. Sharif Mahmood Khalid, on this particular conversation. But let's get the clarity on this position of labor first from Professor Ransford Jampo. He joins us from his base. Prof, you're welcome to our front. I hope you are doing well this evening.
Hi, good evening. I'm fine by the grace of God.
There are reports, media reports largely, that there appears to be some discord on the front of labor, and that the Civil and Local Government Staff Association of Ghana, in the very person of its leadership man, be it in his personal capacity or as representative of the group, is not particularly enthused about the position opposing pension funds' involvement in our domestic debt exchange. How true is this claim?
Well, I think the best person to answer this question is the one who made the statement, the CLOSAC Executive Secretary, Mr. Bampo. So the best person that, for you to ask that question. But if I want to move on, I would tell you that because for some time now I am calling for labor unions to close their ranks and be united in fighting for the betterment of the interests of labor. Because I'm calling on them to form a constituency to protect labor matters, I was a bit worried when I heard the so-called media reportage that CLOSAC had taken a different position. And so I took it upon myself to call Mr. Bampo of CLOSAC. And I had a discussion with him this afternoon. And it turned out that he was talking about something different. I think he's been misquoted and misreported. And the media decided to be sensational, to be picky and choosy about what he thinks would make the news. And it's important that we make this clear, Raymond, that it is part of the duties of the media to inform, to educate. But sensationalism and misinformation and twisting or picking statements out of context just for the purposes of being sensational and making the news are not productive, and they undermine the very work that the media is supposed to be doing. So it is important that you call Mr. Bampo himself and he would clarify. He was talking about cash flow issues for his scheme that he told me that, he in his own analysis, he feels that his scheme may be able to have some cash flow, and even that, he would have to bounce or discuss the matter with his board of trustees for them to take a decision. And so it's not like CLOSAC has taken a decision that they are swallowing hook, line, and sinker whatever government is throwing at them. Tomorrow, TUC and other labor unions would hold a meeting, and CLOSAC, Mr. Bampo, will be there. If he's taking a different position, then he would have boycotted that meeting. And so the point is that let us not allow some media practitioners to be overly sensational about matters in a manner that sows seeds of discord between people who are expected to work together in unison to be able to project the interests of labor.
I get the clarity there. So he has made the direct representation to you that he's been misquoted and misrepresented, and that he didn't make the direct claim that CLOSAC is backing government's inclusion of pension bonds. That clarity I get from you. And I'm grateful to you this evening, Professor Ransford Jampo. He is with the University Teachers Association of Ghana at Legon, and as he clarifies there, Isaac Bampuado, who leads the group Civil and Local Government Staff Association of Ghana, is insisting that it's a misapprehension of what he actually said or some misunderstanding of what he meant by the comments he's made, and that Labour will tomorrow, as I did indicate early on, have a crunch meeting to take a definite position and the way forward on this particular matter to do with that request for participation in the new Government of Ghana proposed alternative offer for pension funds. Now, I did tell you that we'll get to the bottom of this matter. To help us properly appreciate this conversation, I brought on board people I am convinced you would appreciate. First, we'll be joined by Finance Minister, the immediate past in the Republic of Ghana, the Honorable Secretary from the United States of America. And we will switch to the other parts of the Western world, to the United Kingdom, specifically, to speak to Assistant Professor of Finance there and get a better appreciation of what this is all about. Gentlemen, you're welcome to our front.
Thank you very much, Raymond, from the U.S. Apologies to your viewers. I have to stop, and therefore, as you can see, making this connection from my car.
Well, that sounds interesting. I need to start off by asking you, on the face of it, of course, what does this request for participation in the new Government of Ghana proposed alternative offer for pension funds really mean? Let me start with you, Mr. Tekpe. To the layperson, how would you recharacterize these words, and what signal are we seeking to add pension funds to the already concluded domestic debt exchange program?
Well, let's take it in 3 steps.
Okay.
In December, the government announced the debt exchange, alternatively called a haircut, which means that if you are holding government bonds domestically, and the external one will come, but I don't want to confuse it. Let's focus on the domestic. If you are holding government bonds presently, you were being offered new terms, which involves 1, suspension of interest payments in some instances. 2, a deferment of the payment of the principal to a longer period. And then 3, the combination of these was that, you may, in some cases, not receive interest at all. In some cases, you may receive a lower interest. And then government would have to, within, 2 to 3 years, commit to paying, the principal amount. So that was what we had in December. The only group of loans that were excluded, both domestic and external, were loans owned by some multilateral, meaning, for example, IMF, World Bank, African Development Bank, and then, also, those were the principal ones that were excluded. Now, second, by February, next step, then the labor agitation began, government met labor, and we were told expressly that, labor, government had come to some agreement with labor. The long and short of it is that they were effectively to be excluded from, the domestic debt exchange, program. Now we are looking at what seems to be a reversal, and some sweetness which the government has added in terms of, maybe some better interest rates, some, better eventually when the payment is made principal. So these are the 3 steps, and that means the proposal on the table is that, labor representing and other pensioners, representing basically pensions, but there were other people at the table, if you recall, that met the Ministry of Finance. So these are in a larger context, the 3 steps, basic steps. There were intermediate ones, but I think we can simplify, the discussion with talking about the substantive, changes, that have occurred. The question then is, why would a change be made? You see, the Ministry of Finance, if you recall, did come up front that, confirming the fact that we could not go to the stock exchange in particular, to get money, and even for the external creditors, and we haven't touched on the external creditors yet because that's also on the table, that we would have to restructure, and it's not possible. And once you were also restructuring the domestic bonds as opposed to treasury bills, you see in the letter carefully, treasury bonds, which is government, treasury is government, and the bills. You have seen a phenomenon in the last, since these changes occurred. Government heavily dependent on only, treasury bills for financing, the budget deficit, because we are not able to issue, domestic bonds, which are new ones, which are the old ones are being restructured. No confidence in the domestic market for that. We are also unable to get loans apart from maybe loans that are disbursing already, and loans such as, the multilaterals, and that may be the reason why they were excluded to begin with. In, let's say, what we call the country strategy paper with the World Bank and then other support, which is already in the pipeline and has been agreed. Those are the ones that are flowing, and those are targeted mainly towards, projects. Now, you would also recall, or listeners will recall, that around the time that the haircut package was being, announced, and let me use that because that is a common expression which many Ghanaians, call it, so that we don't go into technicalities. At the time the haircut was being announced, we were told that the World Bank and IMF had come to do something called the Ghana's Debt Sustainability Analysis, DSA. Yeah. Now, that debt sustainability analysis came before the announcement. What is a debt sustainability analysis? It says that you are unable to pay your debt. We have come to work with you to analyze it. This is something which the fund at the bank does every 2 years or so. So there's a history to it. And we think that you have to, since you are unable to pay the existing debt, we want to see how early it will be for you, your debt to be sustainable again. Sustainable means you are unable to go to the market, you are unable to borrow, you are unable to, it's short of saying you are bankrupt, you are defaulting, you are not able to. So how long will it take for you, to one, add your domestic bonds again to the treasury bills? How long will it take for you, to add, let's say, other creditors who are not part of the multilateral, like the UK government, the Chinese government, yes, some of the commercial loans that we took, not the government ones, the commercial ones, which is why we are talking to the Chinese and others, So the point then is, how long will it take for all these to come back on stream? To establish that, and I'm trying to simplify, to establish that, the program, they show you a scenario that says, this is the revenue you are going to collect over a certain period of time. Okay. Now, this is your export potential and the revenue it will bring. Why export? That is because we are going to be paying our external debt when we restructure in foreign currency, not in local currency. So they are looking at the means, which you would use to come back to, sustainability. Currently, your revenue is not able to meet those, commitments. Now, we were told that we will return to sustainability somewhere around 2036, 2037, thereabout. The point I want to make with bringing the DSA into the conversation is that you will recall various government statements have stated that it could take up to 10 years, right? So if you look from now, 2033 onwards, it is to see that there is a certain calibration between the debt exchange agreements and when we would return to sustainability. Now, 2 points, and then maybe we can go to, further questions and the others to come in. Now, the first point is that reaching debt sustainability became a condition for Ghana's draft program, which was embodied in the SLA. We all know the SLA now, staff level agreement, to be approved by the Africa Department and then approved as a prior action, to, the board taking Ghana's, agreement. We were told this would occur in December, March, after the SLA agreement shifted to March. We are in April, and we know that Ghana was not on the March agenda. We slipped into April. The earliest we are told is probably May, which is what the Ministry of Finance officially, has said. Fitch has said that it could be June. What does that mean? It means that because we are unable to meet the conditions for going to the board, the time has to be extended. Now, the other catch is that this discussion is on domestic, and most of our discussions have been on domestic, but we are yet to reach agreement with the external creditors.
Oh, but I mean,
China being the largest.
So is that not foregone conclusion now? The minister says we marshal the fastest completion of the process for an IMF deal. He says all the 6 prior approvals, we have resolved them. What is outstanding today is that we need assurances from our external creditors, and that is left to them. Dependent on government of Ghana alone, we have resolved all the elements that we are sold. And we did it in record time. Very impressive performance.
One, what is an assurance? What is an assurance when we have the African departments, the IMF managing director who spoke did not say emphatically, that, from the perspective of the fund, they are satisfied. What I heard the managing director and the head of Africa and others say is that, they would assist Ghana, to make sure that those who are at the table, especially the external creditors, and we have been put under what is called the DSSI framework, which was the debt suspension initiative, which we did not, opt, if you remember, around, HIPIC.
Yeah.
That is where we are now. So if, we have agreed, I think that's for the sake of middle class, academics, and the rest, let's see the terms. We know the domestic terms. Where are the external terms, which has been agreed? If there's an agreement, what are we waiting for? If we are waiting for assurances from them, then I think it is early, just like the SLA was touted to be a success, just like March was touted, to be a definite date for us to go to the board, now, May. So what does that mean? Are we therefore able to go to the board in April if everything is okay? Why May and why June? So given this, and I've given these instances, I remember our stance that we were never going to go to the fund anyway, and that we were capable of handling our own issues. So given some of these instances, the 3 or 4 instances which I've cited, I would wait. Ultimately, if there is agreement, what will be the most substantive thing that we are going to see? We are going to see the draft agreement. I know that some prior actions, they were not stated as prior actions. But if you look at the tax increases in Parliament, they are prior actions. When the agreement comes, you will see them there. If you see some of the expenditure measures that were taken as part of the budget, they were prior actions, right? If you see recent tariff increases, how do I know? Because these are the very things which we have included in previous IMF agreements, right? So instead of taking a package, to Parliament and everybody knowing for certain this is what we are doing, we are taking things, in bits, and then it's only when it was becoming difficult for the tax measures to be approved, that the concession was made that these were actually prior actions, right? So I would hesitate, and wait, one at least to see the draft 2 documents, which, will contain the terms and conditions under the all IMF program, the Memorandum of Economic, program. It was ME Finance and Economic and Finance Program, which we call the MEFP. And then 2, the letter of intent containing what is supposed to be the Ministry of Finance, Government of Ghana's position in going the letter to the board that these are the things that we specify, which in principle would be what we had agreed with the staff, which the staff will now take, to the board. Now, so if
I understand you properly, forgive me, you are saying it's early days yet, so we cannot start parroting our success in achieving within record time the completion of our prior approvals and also the readiness of this country for an IMF deal. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I have given instances where we were told we will not go to the IMF under any circumstances, instances where we jubilated after reaching an SLA with the IMF staff in Accra, even though that SLA stated specifically that reaching a debt sustainability agreement with our creditors, both domestic and foreign, would be a condition for going to the board. We presented it as though it were a success. We have seen the instance where, based on that, we were given end December, which then became end, May after the December came, and the debt restructuring, came in. There were hints of it, and we had to rely on the markets, ratings agencies, and others to get the information. But presto, it became an issue. Now, we have seen the situation where some of us had asked, will the agreement, with labor before what is committed to paper, divert from the debt sustainability path or not? There was no response. So, Raymond, I'm giving you instances, and I'm saying that based on this, I would wait and see 2 documents in every IMF, 17 IMF programs that, we have had. There are 2 documents. One is what we call the MEFP, Memorandum of Economic and Financial, program, with which we have agreed. 2, I want to see the letter of intent, which is always signed by the Minister for Finance and the Governor and transmitted to the African department.
I need to bring in Dr. Mahmoud. Yes, but yeah. The question, I'm not sure we are on the same page on it. The question I'm asking is, the man says we have recognized and organized this within record time all over the world. The likes of Chad, the likes of other countries, Zambia and co, they have not achieved the success with which we have marshaled forces and gotten help from the IMF. And we are almost at the brink, just waiting for assurances. The question I'm asking you is it true that this is record time mobilization, unlike other countries, including Chad?
Well, if you take it that, I would say it's within the normal period. If you take it that IMF agreements normally take 6 months, to negotiate. What we have achieved is normal. If it's going to be end of May. Why am I saying that? The first staff visit after we made the announcement was in September. Then we moved it to October. Then the missions came, right, in September, right? Then by November, there were exchanges. October, the government of Ghana went to Washington as part of the annual meetings to have discussions. A mission came. December, we had a draft SLA, 3 months. Okay? Then you move on to January, February, March, right? 6 months. That is the framework. In fact, the last program that Ghana did under the Mahama administration took 6 months, 5 to 6 months. And even then, we had a homegrown policy and others already. So, no, I wouldn't say that it is record time, unless you are starting the process from maybe, January or whatever. But I'm saying that, yes, it may be premature also given what I have said. So one, I don't think that it's record time if you look at when the whole process started. You can check for yourself when the announcement was made that we were going to the fund. We did it, we made that announcement before the budget was presented, to Parliament, which is why you have some prior actions being included, in that, being included in the budget. Yes.
Now I'll come to
I would also contest that statement.
I will come to the point that's specifically directed at the current bonds and the offer on the table. But I would like to hear your brief thoughts on this particular extraordinary work we have done. Record time. Countries like Chad and Co. are countries that went to the IMF ahead of us, but have not been able to go through this phase within record time. We should be applauded, shouldn't we, Dr. Mahmoud Khalid?
Well, Raymond, I tend to have a different view. Why it's not any exciting initiative for a sovereign state to go to the IMF in the first place. It's a matter of last resort, and you could see we were struggling, which is why we are there. So why should we be applauded ourselves for having gone to the IMF? And the comparisons you are making, no disrespect to any country. You look at the economic size of these countries you are mentioning, the economic progress. I mean, these are countries that have literally, probably in the last 3 decades or so, been engulfed in civil wars and the likes of that. So I think that making that comparison in and of itself, it's a slap at the wrist. And I think that it doesn't really strategically position us very well within the international scheme of things and how we tout ourselves to be that economic mecca within the sub-region. So I think that it's not anything to be proud about.
Now, before we talk about the record time delivery of this, the crux of our engagement is that domestic debt exchange program and the very latest, and there's a very interesting title that's mostly given to this. That title is springing forth a certain refreshing approach to it now. It says this is request for participation in the new, that's something new, Government of Ghana proposed alternative offer for pension funds. Now, on the face of it, does it look new, an alternative offer, and something that's worth considering?
Well, I think for me, how I look at it on the face of it holistically, if you look at it, is that here's a government that is desperate. So you see the desperation in the tone of the letter. Again, when they went, or first of all, when they decided to touch the pension pot, there was public approvals, and you would see the former Chief Justice and key stakeholders getting in. And I think that offer lapsed, and they are bringing in a new offer, in quotes. But if you look at the contents of the letter, I don't think it's anything new. It's just a deferment of issues. They are talking about, net present values being changed. That's not an absolute measure, right? Because that is not static in and of itself. But fundamentally also, the tone carries a PR dimension to it within the letter, which talks about writing to the Board of Trustees to sort of indicate that there's a placating measure of engaging stakeholders here. Because when they came up in the first phase of trying to touch the pension pots, you would see that the attack against government was that they didn't have proper stakeholder engagement. So the PR element to this is that, okay, let's start by writing to the boards of trustees of these pension funds to see how we can invite them to the table to discuss these issues. But what we are failing to realize is that within these boards is an inherent risk of expertise and an appreciation of the issues on the table. You know how these boards function of these pension funds, government appointees and the likes of that. Without mentioning names, the board chairs of some of these, Senate, i.e., what are the expertise they have to appreciate what they bring into the table if they are the key stakeholders that we are engaging, right? And that is, for me, this is a dangerous precedent that we are going into by touching pension pots and bringing them in to the fray again, in the sense that pension pots are institutional investors tend to actually police markets and economic space. But if we are trying to bring them into the fray of this, what it means is that every government comes in and we hit a snag and we need to recapitalize our system. We need to go back to the pension post, or we have to touch it. And I think that precedence is quite dangerous.
But the minister explained that the proposal has been crafted to facilitate the execution of the MOU, addressing government's financial needs while maintaining the value of the pension funds. That should be good, right?
Yeah, you read the tone of the letter. It says, we think this is. That's not enough.
Okay.
What are the key elements that we have to go to? What is XYZ you are investing these things in? We're talking about net present value here of these and at a discounted percentage. That is still not enough. Can they go deeper? What is it that they are thinking that it is that if they restructure, or the new restructuring would be an improvement of the old version? So what it means is that, if you look at it within bond terms, right, when a bond actually is coming to its expiry of life, it doesn't yield much again. So if government extends it, it's only natural that it will yield more. And that's what has been done. How is that any different or rocket science within the economic space to improving that?
Now, there are things it says this will do, that the new offer is actually designed to achieve same average maturity as pension funds currently holding of the whole bonds, and also says it will actually achieve a similar average coupon too, while alleviating the cash constraint to the government for over the first 2 years. This is factual, right? Based on the term shared.
Yeah, but post the first 2 years, what happens? What's the length? Till 2037, isn't it? That's a long period of time. Time value of money, inflation, and other factors. How are we bringing that in? How are we convincing ourselves that this is what it is? So I think that there's still a lot of work to be done. It may be a step in the right direction as far as stakeholder engagement is concerned, but government needs to do enough to deepen that letter.
Now, when the first one was introduced on December 5th, and the subsequent one came in later on, there was a study by Professors Elikpli Mablore and co. that concluded that the second one was an improvement on the first one. Would you say that this alternative offer is an improvement on the last two that were introduced?
Well, I'm anti-touching pension funds. So per my diction, there's nothing like improvement when it comes to these issues, right? There, it is a long-term deferment. And if that happens, if you want to call that improvement without factoring in other key factors that may happen and the premium of risk that is attached with this, then you can call it an improvement. But I wouldn't want to classify that as an improvement. Bottom line, left to me alone, pension costs should not be touched. And as I said, it's a dangerous precedence we are setting for other governments that may seek to follow.
But for a government that says that at 80% of success in the last domestic debt exchange program, it has actually done a lot of good work in that area and call it successful, why would you think they want to come back to deal with pension funds? I thought
that tells you that it wasn't successful after all, Raymond. So I think that, again, there is a certain level of opaqueness in government communications, as indicated by my elder comrade, Sektekwe, right? You would realize that even with the signals coming from Parliament, government is not upfront to concede that these are IMF concessions that we are meeting. And that, again, for me, is worrying because there's still that lack of transparency element within this engagement. If we're engaging the fund, let's do it fully. Can we be transparent with these engagements, right? Can we spell out the terms and agreements? Because you can't go to the IMF and have things hidden, right? There's a signaling effect when it comes to going. And anyone who is familiar with IMF arrangements and the likes of that, you begin to see that signals. And as you would see, for the first time again in this letter, they've actually conceded that they are doing that to meet the IMF framework, which I think it's a good step. If they begin to do all of this and make it more transparent, at the end of the day, look, it's a sovereign nation, right? We're all seeking, it's not politics, it's not partisanship. We're all seeking to have economic stability. So the more you are transparent with these things, right, the more we have investor confidence. Even with all of this you're talking about saying that is an improvement, it has another inherent risk within it, which ratings agencies in the long term could come after, and that could affect us in the future as well. So it's just a deferment of our woes and concern.
So what's this inherent risk? I didn't get a clarity on that.
Yeah, the point is that what we say is that we're using NPV values and discounted cash flows or whatever it is, which they've not spelled out. So what these could be arbitrary, they are not very scientific because some guesswork elements is in there, right? So this is where the inherent risk is if we don't achieve that projection that we are making, more so when the government is thinking and not very definite.
Now, I mean, some of these things would be over the heads of many people in the country. Your conclusion is that this is not a better deal.
My conclusion is that it's not a better deal. Plus, the real engagements as well. My concern with pension pots and writing to the trust boards. My concern here is that do we have enough technical expertise on these boards, right, to have a full appreciation of what the engagements they're going to have in the coming days? What I expect is that the board of these trusts should give us confidence in the response they would give to them, based possibly on the in-house advisory they would be getting from their experts within the pension funds.
Already,
and if that happens, then I will be confident that we are probably getting somewhere.
Already,
this is all technical issues on the surface, as you said, going above the heads of most people. And on the face value of it, if you read it, it might sound exciting, and you say, okay, well, yeah, there's an improvement in percentages. We'll get this paid. This has been deferred for X period of time. But on the whole, when you look at it in reality, factoring in the real issues of economic exposure and the risk premium, I think that we're still headed for a bit of uncertainty.
Now, there is also a question that is on the minds of many people considering this today. There appears to be some very different views coming out of the pension fund managers and also from the Labour front. Labour, in a united form, we are told today, are outwardly opposed to this particular new offer, but their pension fund managers and scheme managers are posturing towards an open and quite admissive process to this.
So it is for them to come together then. The fund managers need to convince labor unions. Raymond, I can understand where the labor unions are coming from, right? Avoiding not to be very technical here. But when you look at these issues, I've always spoken about this extensively. We live in a climate of economic environment where pension poverty is endemic.
Okay.
Right. You have people probably, retiring after 35 years of service, of public service, and the lump sums they are taking home can't even build a one-bed apartment in Accra or probably in any of our big cities. Right. So if we actually have an endemic pension poverty, let alone to talk about the outgoings. So the fear is that how many people or how many retirees are we having probably years when we're talking about? We're talking about paying lump sums out to them. We're talking about paying, their premiums on, monthly, annual basis, and the likes of that, and all of these investments and bond yields. How is that convincing? So that is their fear. And as laymen who are investing their sweat, blood, and tears into these investments, I think that the fund managers owe them a duty rather than just tilting towards that, to explain to them so they can have a united front in actually engaging government. The fund managers may be seeing something myself and my senior, probably the laymen on the streets, are not seeing. So if they have enough information to convince us that this is what it is, they need to come out and do that.
Now, I will bring you back into the conversation, but let me go to Mr. Tekpe. The understanding I get from Dr. Khalid is that no matter how you look at this, even though on the face of it, it might look like a very nice deal, there's more to it that meets the eye, and it's not as lofty and an improvement as many want it to look like. You agree?
Well, Raymond, at the risk of oversimplifying, if I hold a bond and the value is 100, and there was to be a haircut, where I would get, 80, at the end of a certain period, which is what the haircut is all about. And I protest, and I'm told that, okay, you'll be excluded. I'm expecting, 100. And as Dr. Khalid said, I'm being offered something new with the government itself, say that will give me the value of what I used to hold by 2036, 2037. Okay. You are bringing me back to 100. You discounted everything to 80, potentially. And you are bringing me back to 100, where I was. There's nothing that says that, it will be above, although the present value I read somewhere is about 1.15, which is, you will get 15%. what is the rate of inflation? That's the inherent risk and volatility which, Doc was talking about, Prof was talking about. So it's quite uncertain, the path. Meanwhile, the instrument called the Stabilization Fund, which we put in place to cater for, an unforeseen crisis. Typical example, up to 400 has been withdrawn after the initial 250 million, for COVID. It's completely dismantled today. So those structures are dismantled. Sinking fund dismantled. So what is it that, gives me hope and promise? Now, secondly, let me make two quick points on I think we shouldn't underestimate, the potential of labor and pensioners. Who are pensioners? And who are in the labor union? Don't they include professors who have taught and have retired? Remember that we have private pension systems also involved. Assuming that you even think that, don't they include, former ministers? Don't they include former justices of the court? Which is why, we saw some very prominent, faces. Don't they include, so I think back to the vibe that there are people within this segment who are capable, who are finance people, who have given, years of service and understand the computations and others that, And one of the things, I've always stated, which I learned, is to underestimate labor. Because within labor, you have PhDs and you have whatever. The fact that you talk about labor, should not. Because remember, when you talk about labor, there are the senior staff associations, others, which, comprise very, high executives and the rest. It includes bankers, whose pension funds and others are, it includes market people who work in the stock exchange, in Ghana, people who work, even in the pension, trust that we're talking about. So I believe that, we shouldn't belittle, with such statements and make it look like government is doing a favor to, some of these people. They are capable of understanding, what is it that is going on. So the other point I like to make is that, you see, what is going on is quite serious because we had been developing a bond market. If I give you a brief history, the bonds were like treasury bills. Government bonds were like treasury bills. They were being held, by the central bank, right? In 2015, under the experience we had with the external bonds, we decided to take the trading of secondary bonds, right, make it tradable by moving it from the central bank onto the stock exchange so that it becomes liquid, it becomes fluid, and as they are exchanged, and government meets its commitment. One, especially interest payments. But two, the value based on macroeconomic performance and others appreciates over a given period. You are building a domestic market, which government itself can tap in, others can tap in, for loans and the rest.
Okay.
That is what is at stake. That is what is at stake. We'll not be focusing on this. So, and I can say that there was a measure of success, like the sinking fund and others. Why am I saying that? When the stock exchange was celebrating, I believe, its 30th anniversary, at the banquet that was organized, there were prizes and things there were acknowledgements that were made. And this market that started in 2015, today, is the largest market.
Okay.
Larger than the corporate bond market, larger than the equity bond, what you call the fixed income market, which is dominated by government, in Ghana. So we are again, looking at the confidence, in the domestic bond market. In fact, the domestic bond market, because we started paying down our bonds, the first sovereign bonds from the sinking fund and others, at a point in time, more than 50% of the bonds that were held were actually being held by, what we call the non-residents. You would have heard about them in the budgets and others, which today exited. They were the first to exit, right? So I think that if we cast a wider picture, what is going on is not just about workers. It's not about retirees. It's not just about pensioners. But it's about, a certain reform, that had been done gradually over 40 years being destroyed. And I think that is very important for us.
Now, that's an important point, because going into the future, I'm sure there will be conversations about the actual impact of all of this restructuring on the various sectors and what we've tried to pull up in the years that we've done before. Now, I think you almost left it up on the point in the previous question about whether or not we will get this IMF deal in May, in June, or sometime after that. From your experience, is the May ending deadline a realistic and achievable one from your expertise?
Well, I did say that we could have, and I've been quoted on that, we could have an agreement, in May. But I set some preconditions, particularly the external bond, right? You see, we have another measure which is likely to be discussed. What is the status of the loans, that government owes Bank of Ghana that were brought into, the debt exchange discussions? Did they dilute? And what is the, consequences of that? The second factor is that for one reason or the other, that a lot of people have disagreed, with the, at least even if we are split, with the managing director of the fund, when, she sought to, blame everything, on COVID, which we know from the Article 4 of the fund's own document, but that by 2019, we already really, by 2020, 2021, no less a person that the World Bank president, the counterpart, now is handing over, appealed to us to go to the debt suspension, initiative. So, yes, the second factor is, however you may look at it, the goodwill, which the fund is willing to come to the table to support, in the negotiations that are going to take place, with the external, creditors. And in all this, transparency is very important. I hope that there won't be another, factor, to disturb. If, we work hard on the external, as the minister has said, and we are able to reach an agreement domestic, which seems to be a reversal, then we could be on course. But I don't think we should take it for granted. I think we have seen enough celebration, and hopes dashed, of many things around this IMF program.
Now, if we do not meet it by the end of May, what's the downside here?
Well, we are already defaulting, and we are in junk. So we have the downside already. We are not able to go to the stock exchange, which we did successively for 8 years after, 3 or so years of break after Kufuor, his excellency, pardon, his bond that was issued during, his tenure. So enough has gone on already with the Ghanaian economy, right? So how low do we want to go? That's a question. Our ratings are in junk. So I'm saying that we are already in a situation where we should not, celebrate our position now, with little successes. We are in defaulters, and so I would say that, the reason we have to back up is not because of anything that we are going to do, because we are already, in that sinkhole, and we need to get out of it.
I will come back finally for your final words. But Dr. Khalid, I was asking this question because I need your thoughts on it too. The deadlines that we're supposed to operate within that scheme. And again, this new alternative one ends at the end of this particular month, the month of April, right? I mean, is that an achievable deadline? Would it be extended like the previous one had a couple of extensions happening to it? And on the bigger scale, the IMF deal and the deadline conundrum. Would we meet it when we say we want to meet it?
Well, I think probably either the government, the lack of transparency is why we have this whole confusion with deadlines and raise hopes and dim hopes. And for us to have real confidence moving forward, I think that government have to be straightforward and come up with a roadmap. Accent tight deadlines, we are not in government, so we are not part of the negotiation processes. But per standard IMF arrangements, if you look at the duration, I think that we are within time, and June is not really far off to achieving these things. But again, my worry is that except for the economic management arm of the agreement, if it goes through, I don't see what impact, monetary terms, it would have, given the long period of delays and what is happening. The impact that you probably have had if we had had it much earlier would be somewhat derailed, and that concerns me a great deal. Again, if you look at the domestic arrangements we are making, I think that the government, as part of its program, should be preparing a domestic economic education program on investments, because it's really going to kill investor confidence in the domestic market, especially within the middle class, which previous governments have fought over the years to actually educate and sensitize and encourage the middle class to get into investments. With what is happening now, it's killing that. And for the government to actually, alongside what it's doing, have to create a program to actually reassure the middle class and those also planning to be a part of the investment basket that all is not lost. And I think that this is going to be a long way to actually getting a good roadmap as far as our economic stability is concerned. Other than that, it's not really looking very pretty, I must confess.
In December, the minister was quite clear in his mind that the economy would crumble and basically be in extreme crisis if we did not get this IMF deal as early as we wanted it to be. Somewhere in March was the earlier touted one. But we're still here. Can we weather the storm in the next available date if it doesn't happen?
Yeah, we still, because as I said, when it comes to contracting or dealing with, we are a sovereign nation, right?
Okay.
Dealing with the IMF. The risk element is not always as huge as going to the capital markets or probably going to the stock market, right? There is some level of certainty. It's just that there might be some delays, and as I indicated to you, and as my senior comrade Sektepe mentioned, you would see signals coming out from Parliament, right? The president quickly signed these bills, into law pretty much soon. So you see that yes, the government itself is in a hurry. But for me, I just think that we should. It's a shame if we should be celebrating these things. There's nothing to celebrate about going to the IMF on this program, right? We should rather be very humble because we're going to IMF with our tails in between our legs. So what are we celebrating?
The final question goes out to you, Mr. Tekpe. Some are saying that by the current arrangement, there is an apparent positioning towards pushing all the monetary pressures that will come into the future, that's post-2025, and after that particular period. Some are indicating that whichever government takes over from this government will have a lot more headache to deal with.
Certainly. I made that call. If you remember, you can Google and see. When the zero coupon bond was made, it was touted again, as we are seeing today, as some innovation which no African country, if you do something which nobody else had done before, why, and is that good? How come South Africa, some of our mentioned some of the countries that are ahead of us, have not done it? What we did with the zero coupon bond, which was a wake-up call, was to give out 150 million up front, from a value of about 500, which was going to be the interest on the bond to Afri-Exim and the rest. And we got only 350, face value, right? So the answer to your question is quite obvious, that we have been in that situation, for some time now, and therefore we need to, and I agree with, Prof, that transparency is something that is required. And yes, that is one thing. Secondly, the point is quite clear. We've heard it from the horse's own mouth. The Minister of Finance has said that if by end of March, what's happening after March? Snappers here and there of defaults taking place, and the rest. So yes, it will be worse if we do not reach agreement as soon as possible. We cannot run Ghana's economy financing the deficit, right, on only treasury bills in a domestic market that's not deep. And by the way, it's not just individuals who have their stake. Part of the savings is coming from the banks. Remember that under the regulatory requirements for, for liquidity ratios and capital adequacy ratios, and the banks and others are required to hold a certain percentage, of their investments in T-bills, and in government bonds, right? So it's not just the pension funds that are, at risk. The banks and the rest are also at risk, the financial sector, and if we continue this way, by the way, there are other problems that are still persisting. I'm sure you've seen it. I've been highlighting the issue of, arrears, energy sector bond.
Okay.
By including ESLA, in the debt restructuring, it means that money is not available. By including Get Fund, and you see students, scholarship outside asking for the allowances and things to be paid. By including Dachi bond, it means that flow is not available, right? And so the whole issue of arrears, which the government's own document, which was a requirement in the 2015 Public Financial Management Act, was never published until 2021, shows that we are sitting, on 77 billion, pipeline, including 55, 20 paid, and therefore we have about 50. If you take a simple exchange rate,
I get your point.
10 to 1.
Except that, once again, I don't have enough time to conclude this conversation with you, but we should do this in the future. Many thanks to you, the former Finance Minister, Sektepe, and also Assistant Professor Dr. Khalid Mahmood. And many thanks to you for joining us on our front too, ladies and gentlemen. That's where we wrap it up.
Right. You're most welcome. Thank you.